Thanks, Laura, for that introduction, and especially for your service to New Orleans. The rebirth of New Orleans is a very important story, and is this it? And a big part of that story is all the volunteers who've come our way and helped us rebuild. So I want to tell a story on Skip, too, because when he wrote me, I was thrilled to death to get this email from the dean of the Clinton School of Public Service. Where's this coming from? But I was on my book tour, and things were going really well, and I got up my nerve, and I just wrote a funny email back, kind of a test to see if he was an okay guy. I wrote back, "Well, I'll come if there's a McClard's in Little Rock." and he wrote back with a smile. You could tell there was a smile on his face. He said, "No, we don't have a McClard's, but we've got a whole hog," or something like that. No one's taken me there yet, but I'm hopeful. So it's so great to be here. It's really a thrill. Because of the hot springs connection, Skip suggested I emphasize that, and so this talk will explore that part of the book. But today I want to tell you some stories about two iconic New Orleanians, my parents, Ruth and Rodney Fertel. When I'm introduced in New Orleans, locals are likely to hang on the name. Fertel. Fertel. If the looks are bright and eager, as if a mouth-watering steak has just been set before them, then I know I'll hear, "Are you Ruth Fertel's son?" Or, as if I were the offspring of a restaurant, "Are you Ruth's Chris Steakhouse's son?" But if the looks take a decidedly wary turn, then I'm sure to hear, "Are you related to Rodney Fertel?" Or worse, "Are you the Gorilla Man's son?" For many years, the wary looks outnumbered the eager ones until my mother's fame outdistanced my father's infamy. I was away at college during my father's run for mayor in safari outfit, complete with pith helmet, with the promise to get a gorilla for the Audubon Zoo. But his name and reputation have been hard to shake. But long before they were New Orleans icons, long before their contentious divorce, when they were first married, my mother and father were two people for whom the world seemed an oyster, theirs to slurp. Perhaps you can see that here in these pictures, as I do, taken on the sidewalk in Hot Springs. But it's this picture that especially fascinates me. If we could return to this moment, this couple, Ruth and Rodney, might catch our eye as they stride down Central Avenue in Hot Springs, Arkansas. In full sunlight, Ruth holds the crook of Rodney's right arm and gazes at the camera with self-assurance and an easy smile. His face in shadow and wearing sunglasses, not unaware of the camera himself, he gazes at her with fondness and regard. He sports a tie with bold ovals. In his right hand, he carries a folded paper, probably the daily racing form. He wears his shirt sleeves rolled. His left arm swings forward with a watch on his wrist, the first of many gold Rolexes, perhaps, and a cigarette in the tips of his fingers. He's yet to give them up. That sunny day in Hot Springs, an unseen ornate gold barrette, tooled in her initials, RUF, holds her hair swept back from her high brow. The barrette is a gift from her husband, whose family is in the trade, pawn shops. Whoops. That's not it. Did that skip too? Huh. Oh well, it's missing. It is 3 years since the end of Second World War, in which Rodney Fertel did not serve. It's 2 years since Ruth Udstad graduated from Louisiana State University with honors in physics and chemistry. She is 21. A former All-State swimmer and basketball player, he is 27. In less than a year, their firstborn son, Jerry, will enter the world. In 2 years, I will arrive. In this year, 1948, Hot Springs is a wide open town dominated by the Southern Club, a gambling house in operation since 1893. In Las Vegas, Bugsy Siegel's Flamingo Hotel is only 2 years old, and the Strip is still but a dream. The mineral baths and the gambling tables draw Rodney and Ruth here from their home in New Orleans for long stays. Rodney enjoys independent means inherited from his pawnbroker grandparents. No job pulls him home. The horses bring them too. In 1948, the fairgrounds, oops, that was the slide that I wanted to show you. This is the pawn shop, the Fertels, whose slogan was, "A friend in need is a friend indeed. If you need money, see Fertels." Lowest rates in town. And they saved every nickel and dime and bought real estate, and my father inherited that, which fueled his eccentricities. The horses bring them too. In 1948, the fairgrounds in New Orleans celebrates its Diamond Jubilee, 75 years of continuous thoroughbred racing. Hot Springs Oakland Park is almost as old, its clubhouse older, the first in the country. This very summer, Louisiana Governor Earl Long, Huey's brother, and an inveterate gambler, comes to Hot Springs for his arthritis. Governor Long begins his day with the daily racing form and the tout sheets. Contacts in the mob, who just installed slots throughout Louisiana with Long's help, let him know when the fix is in. Ruth and Rodney Fertel share Governor Long's taste for racehorses. In a few years, Ruth will earn her thoroughbred trainer's license, the first woman in Louisiana to do so. Still in the honeymoon glow, Rodney splurges on a room at the Arlington Hotel. Oh, there's the horse theme. The Arlington Hotel, which looms beyond the camera's sight at the head of Central Avenue. Al Capone at one time kept a fourth-floor corner suite overlooking the Southern Club, his favorite, just across the street. He played at a raised poker table in order to command a clear view of the entire room. When he strode down Bathhouse Row, Capone's goons surrounded him, 2 in front, 2 behind, and 1 on either side. Over my parents' shoulder, the photo shows a sign for Hammond's Oyster House. Seafood, steaks, chicken. Hammond's, no apostrophe. Seafood, 2 words. Inside, a sign promises one day out of the ocean, meaning one day from the Louisiana bayous where Ruth was born. Rodney prefers Hammond's to the Arlington's dining room. Arlington's grand dining room, with its organ and white-gloved black waiters, is where at age 13 I develop a taste for watercress salad and cornbread sticks slathered in butter and honey. Rodney has yet to develop his taste for political clowning. His Gorilla Man campaign for New Orleans mayor, with its catchy slogan, "Don't vote for a monkey, elect Fertel and get a gorilla," lies 20 years in the future. Ruth has not yet read the classified ad that will, in 1965, lead her to borrow $22,000 to purchase a little steakhouse with 17 tables near the fairgrounds in New Orleans that in just a few years becomes the political power restaurant in a city where much of the civic decision-making was conducted over double martinis and plates full of rich food. Chris Steakhouse, 38 years in business, founded the day she was born. When she started expanding, she added her name, Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. This gave my mother an up-close vantage on the political circus of New Orleans. From a sleepy little racetrack specialty restaurant, the place to celebrate winning the Daily Double, Chris Steakhouse soon became famous for the people you saw there. First came the Texas oilmen, followed by politicians with a nose for a good expense account, food, and for knowing whither and whence the money flows. In New Orleans, because of its aristocratic heritage sustained by the Mardi Gras tradition, public servants are largely funded by blue blood green, and for the most part do their bidding. If the oilmen and the blue bloods from uptown had discovered Chris's, the mayor and his cronies, the city council, and all those who battened at the public trough followed. A lot of that business was carried on at or under Mom's tables, not all of it savory. The buzz was, Chris Steakhouse is where it's at. It's where it's happening. The city council often retired to the large dining room upstairs after Thursday night meetings, their checks quietly picked up by some private concern. The grand jury, including Jim Garrison's infamous Kennedy assassination grand jury, often took lunch at Chris's, heard the evidence, and then finished out the day over Mom's generous drinks. The district attorney in New Orleans was powerful in part because of his generous budget to feed and water his flock. What do you say to the guy who's buying you your third beef-eater martini and piling your plate with more lyonnaise potatoes and creamed spinach? Sure, hang the guy. Hey, would you pass the Chateauneuf de Pape? My father's Get the Gorilla campaign made a frontal assault on this three-ring circus, but Dad never exactly played the center ring. In 1969, New Orleans was famous for potholes, poor schools, a failing economy, and political corruption of the highest order. But the sole plank in my father's mayoral campaign bypassed such minor issues and went to the heart of our troubles. The zoo needed a gorilla. Many were convinced that he was sending up the political circus. His equally charming campaign manager, a racetrack tout known for how few bets he won, the black cat Lacombe, responded to Dad's 310 votes in his New Orleans brogue. I didn't know they had that many gorillas in New Orleans. But for Dad, 310 votes was mandate enough. Long before the internet, he somehow found 2 gorillas in Singapore, bought them, lured them back with bananas, and donated them to the zoo. Naming them Red Beans and Rice, he announced he was the only candidate in history who kept all his campaign promises even though it lost. I got to play with them once. Oh, I'm way past. I forgot all about this, sorry. Oh, darn. So that's the 2 baby gorillas. And I got to play with them once during my anti-war activist days. Notice my Darwinian shadow. Some were charmed by Dad's monkey business. There were also some who at least questioned what the Get the Gorilla campaign added to the civic discourse. In some ways, my dad was just a rich guy without much direction and with lots of time on his hands. Running for mayor was a way to kill time. As if, as Thoreau warned, you could kill time without injuring eternity. But having lots of time on his hands enabled Dad to become the world traveler, circling the globe 5 times. He believed travel was the best teacher and because he needed company, I got to tag along. He would take me to Europe when I was 15, where we met Salvador Dali, and around the world the next year. But one of our first trips was to Hot Springs in the summer of 1963. I was 13 years old. The best part was I got to drive the whole way up. Of course, I didn't have a license, but Dad had taught me to drive when I was 11, going round and round on the deserted roads behind the golf course in City Park. I sat on his lap in his Dodge Dart, unable otherwise to see over the steering wheel. He worked the brake and accelerator. Now, and 2 years later, with the seat pulled close, I was just tall enough. Driving up and down those hills on country roads, interstates did not yet venture into Louisiana and Arkansas. I could really get up a lot of speed, especially when Dad was asleep. Once on a long downhill grade, I even got up to 90, about all that Dodge Dart could do. Sometimes I had a little trouble staying on my lane, and I got sleepy once in a while, but boy, it was fun. When we first arrived, Dad took me to the fountain in the middle of town. And though it was the middle of the night, we stood around, drank the hot water that came out of the spigots, and filled the plastic jugs Dad kept in the car. Surely the only person in 1959, 63 who was carrying around jugs, right? Who was drinking bottled water. Stood around, drank the hot water from the spigots, and he wore his unmatching Madras shorts and shirt. Nothing could match his excited swagger. Here was something for free that would make you live forever. Can't beat that, son. You'll thank me someday. I didn't especially like drinking hot water, but I did like the hot glazed donuts that we got at the bakery a few yards away. It was the only time I've ever had donuts like that, fried in lard and dispensed by the guy at the back kitchen door in the middle of the night. All that greasy sweetness. Every morning we took the baths at the Buckstaff bathhouse. It took hours. It took hours and hours. Walking around draped in a white sheet was cool, but it also made me feel kind of weird. After we hung our clothes up, we'd soak first in a big marble tub, worn from years of use. The Negro attendant took the scratchy hempen glove that is my glove, which he put my name on, and washed me down, swirling the water around me like a handmade whirlpool. Then, alone for 20 minutes, I'd sit in the hot water that was so special and so good for you. Then I'd get wrapped in the big sheet and sit in the cool-down room. Dad swore by all this and always fell asleep once he got to the cool-down room with its hush and its ceiling fans and its cool-to-the-touch tiles. He snored. Dad preached to me about how good the water was, how it would cure everything because of the minerals in the water and the radioactivity. Dad had the kidneys of a 20-year-old. That's what his doctor says. It's the water. After the baths, the Mountain Valley water, by the way. After the baths, we'd walk down Central Avenue to the Arlington, which was really grand. Dad said you should never worry about the money you spent on food. Like in Gone with the Wind, the elderly waiters wore white gloves and uniforms. Whoops. Getting ahead of myself. The dining room was huge, the ceilings tall, and the food the best part. Crisp cornbread sticks that came out of molds that left even crispier edges. I slathered them with butter and dipped them in little glass pitchers of honey. It was like dessert. Then watercress salad, bitter and peppery, surprising me how much I liked it. I was always so hungry after a morning in the bathhouse. Good for the appetite, son. I wished we could stay at the Arlington. We stayed across from the bathhouses in a cheap rooming house with no air conditioning. Always get the corner room, son, for the cross ventilation. But it was still hot. Air conditioning's no good for you. Dad and I visited Mr. Ball. He had invented Ball's horse liniment, bottles of which were strewn about his airless house. He wore a wife-beater that pooched over his belly. He grew corn and tomatoes in the field behind his house, and I'd get sent out to harvest. The corn towered over me. The corn cobs snapped as I tore them from the stalks and scrunched when I peeled back the husks. The ripe tomatoes easily sheared away from the rich-smelling vines. Dad loved fresh food, dropping the just-shucked corn into the boiling water, slicing the tomatoes with onions. "You don't need all those fancy sauces, son. This is what's good for you. It's all you need." While they played pinochle, I walked to the skating rink nearby. Skating had not been a neighborhood pastime, and I spent an hour trying to find my balance. On the way home, the stars wheeled overhead, and I felt the longing for something concrete, something I could trust. That didn't seem to describe Dad or Mr. Ball. I was surprised at how much time I spent by myself, since Dad spent most of his time at the betting parlor in the Southern Club or the pool hall down Central Avenue. I sometimes joined him, or went out on my own. I liked the Quartz Cave. It wasn't really a cave, but a house where two crazy old guys with too much time on their hands glued quartz crystals to the wall and ceilings and even the windows. I liked the IQ Zoo, with the raccoon that played basketball and the chicken that beat me at tic-tac-toe. "But they get to go first," fellow tourists complained. One night, as I was walking back from an evening movie, alone, lightning lit up the whole horizon in every direction. The constant flicker of light haloing the mountains was something I had never seen in New Orleans, where thunderstorms were a way of life. What was going on? Was it just lightning? Had the Cold War heated up again, since we'd come to Hot Springs? The streets were empty. I wish Dad were here. I couldn't count on his being at the rooming house when I got back, even though it was late. He was probably playing pool. And Mom and Jerry, were they okay? New Orleans was so close to Cuba and the Russian missiles. They said we would be one of the first targets. When I got to the rooming house, the flashes still flickered all around the horizon. Maybe it was just sheet lightning. The rain that finally came that night was torrential. A flash flood coursed through Central Avenue, wedged between two hills, while we slept. The next morning, we found the Dodge Dart filled with silt several blocks down Central Avenue. A fire hydrant had stopped its progress and pierced the door. I flew home, my first plane ride, all by myself. The excitement merged with my relief. I'll end this reading with my book's opening. I begin the book with my mother's death. The Olympia Brass Band played "Didn't She Ramble" after my mother's body was cut loose, as the saying goes in New Orleans, placed in the mausoleum she and her best friend had built together. As is customary in New Orleans, the band played a dirge, "A Closer Walk with Thee," on the way to the entombment. Then, turning from the grave, we celebrated the life. Didn't she ramble? Didn't she ramble? Rambled all around, in and out of town. Didn't she ramble? Didn't she ramble? She rambled till the butcher cut her down. The mourners formed the second line behind the band and the family, what there was of it, marching and dancing to the syncopated rhythms in the hot mid-April sun. Everyone knew this is the way it should be. Though she grew up in the Delta south of New Orleans, in Happy Jack near Port Sulphur, Ruth Fertel was born in New Orleans and had thrived there, reigning as one of the great restaurateurs in a city of great restaurants. The brass band celebrated the considerable rambling she had managed. I had just done the same in my eulogy. A good friend who knew of my conflicts with my mother told me later that he had a moment of panic when I rose to give my eulogy. "I didn't know which speech you would give." He laughed. I knew either one could have been honest. My parents had colorful and fascinating lives. but to live inside their worlds wasn't exactly nurturing. My father was odd, self-centered, and nuts. My slight, feisty mother was determined to feed the world. Ruth Fertel won every accolade in the restaurant industry and became a female icon in the business world. The first lady of American steaks, of American restaurants, according to the official corporate narrative. But the Empress of Steak reserved all the glory for herself. Her appetite for winning excluded everyone, even her offspring. Nearly all the key players in the global empire of Ruth's Chris Steakhouse ended up suing her to get what they felt they deserved. I must confess, I was among them. A story that you will find in the Gorilla Man and the Empress of Steak, a New Orleans family memoir. Thank you for listening.
Okay, we've got some time for questions. If you would raise your hands and then let us get the microphone to you. Okay, we have one right up here. The microphone's coming.
Hi, I was wondering if your mother ever used her education. That's pretty sophisticated for, anybody, especially a woman back then. Or did she just go directly into the
Well, no,
biz?
she had she was a math science whiz and, went off to college at 15, got her BS in physics and chemistry by 19, I think, or no. She did it in 3 years. And then she got a master's. I'm a little unclear on that, whether it was chemistry or physics, but then she took a job as a teacher at McNeese State Teachers College in Lake Charles, which is now, I think, Louisiana State in Lake Charles or something. But the story she told was that she was given a class of jocks, and they were all towering over her and gave her no sense of authority, and she quit. The marriage interceded. She became the first licensed woman trainer. That she had this life as around the racehorses, and then after the divorce, she took her chemistry background and went to work for George Birch, who was a prominent cardiologist, said to be the founder of modern cardiology. And so she worked for him for several years. And so that's one way that she used her background. Was that the question you were asking? Yeah. And then she always explained part of her success in the restaurant business came from her chemistry background. There are lots of restaurateurs or culinarians who'll tell you the importance of chemistry in the background. Of course, now we've got that whole scientific culinary school. So anyway, another way to answer the question is that her brother and sister-in-law had a restaurant down at the mouth of the river, and she learned a bit of the business helping them out. She never mentioned them in any of the corporate narratives, something that stuck in the craw of my Aunt Helen and Uncle Sig.
Questions? I've got one right now. Where's Jerry?
I've yet to hear from Jerry since the book came out. Jerry's not much of a reader. As I say in the book, I don't think it's dyslexia or anything. He certainly had no problem reading the racing form. But, Jerry and I couldn't be more different. We fought like cats and dogs as kids. We just had nothing in common. And, he's gone his way. My joke is kind of self-indulgent, but my joke is that I won the gene pool. Though I had lots of conflicts with my mother, I had more in common with my mother than my father. And Jerry, Jerry's friends read the book and they say, God, I had no idea that Jerry was so like Rodney, and more like him every year. So, Jerry's mom's free spirit. At one point, she and her housekeeper, Erna, who I hired when I was 10, story I tell in the book, came to see me in a new apartment in uptown New Orleans. And Ernest said, "Oh, Randy, this is so you. It's so uptown." And Mom said, "Yeah, Randy's my uptown son." And then there was a beat, and then she said, "And Jerry's my out-of-town son." So Jerry's likely, well, he would take his kids. Well, he named his kids, like I said, he's not much of a reader. He named his firstborn Ryan and spelled it R-I-E-N. He grew up in Lafayette, the town most likely to read that as nothing, right? Rien. And then later he had a son named Arthur, who he named after our great-grandfather, Arthur Udstad, but he spelled it author. And my mother got so angry, she said, "Go fix that name legally." But in the meantime, he had named his horse stable Author's Stable, and he was raising Louisiana breds. And so my friends would go to the track, and they would come back and say, "Why did your brother name his stable after you?" So, I'm sorry, but to answer where is Jerry, I don't know. And it kind of just evokes stories. It's just, Jerry is one of the many stories. His son Ryan is, I don't remember the night I snuck into the Rosemary's bed, but Ryan is more my son than Jerry's. He's getting a PhD in history at Tulane. He's a culinarian. He's doing culinary history. Great kid. And he read the book, and he's okay with it. So that meant a lot to me.
Any other questions?